Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Of course, it's your girl Erin, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different but really exciting and really fun. Knitting basics, knitting 101, pretty much everything that you need to know in order to get started on your very first knitting project. Now, a little bit of a backstory about me. I've been crocheting for close to 20 years and I've been knitting on and off for about the last 3 years, so I can safely say that I do have the basics down. Let's be honest, there are a ton of knitting videos here on YouTube, but I just wanted to be able to explain knitting basics in my own terminology and just kind of like my own thought process, and hopefully this is able to reach you guys out there. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into it. When it comes to knitting, you really only need a few basic materials. First and foremost, you're gonna need some knitting needles. The brand and the type of knitting needles that you use doesn't really matter as long as it's comfortable for you to use and you personally like the quality. So these are just a really standard pair of straight knitting needles. As you can see, they're completely separate from each other. These straight knitting needles are really great for when you guys want to create flat panels, anything very simple and very basic. In my own personal preference, I would recommend that you guys start off with a set of circular knitting needles. So this is what a pair of circular knitting needles looks like. As you can see, we still have both tips here of our knitting needles, and they're very simply connected with this cord. Now, the really great thing about circular knitting needles is the fact that you can knit on these if you guys are making flat panels, or if you guys are creating something in the round. This is more specifically what the cord is used for. For me, it's a lot simpler and a lot easier to use circular knitting needles, even for very small flat projects, because all of your work is really contained just in this one area. So as you can see, when I begin knitting, the area that my knitting needles cover is very limited, and it kind of stays nice and small, and just, there's not a lot of movement. So I would highly recommend circular knitting needles. Of course, I will also leave links for the knitting needles that I use down below if you guys want to check them out. For a quick reference, when you guys are using straight regular knitting needles, as you can see, it takes up a lot of space and a lot of room. So if you guys are trying to get comfortable on your bed or even in your desk, these tips, these ends to your needles are gonna hit everything. They're gonna get caught on everything. They kind of extend past my arm, so they do take up a lot of space, which is why I prefer the circulars, because again, it just keeps everything a little bit more contained. Second up, of course, you're gonna need some corresponding yarn to use with your knitting needles. I've just chosen to go into my little scrap yarn pile, and I've pulled out a bunch of really fun colors just to show you guys different examples in this video. Feel free to pick out any type of yarn that you have, read that yarn label, and make sure that you correspond your knitting needle size with the yarn weight of choice. So now that we've got the basic materials out of the way, we've got our yarn, we have our circular knitting needles, it's time to begin step one, which is casting on, and then we can move into stitches. Now that I have my knitting needles of choice in front of me, and I also have some corresponding yarn, we need to get the actual yarn onto the knitting needles, and to do that, I'm going to start off with a slip knot. Now, we're also going to be moving into a longtail cast on, which to me is kind of like the most universal or the most used cast on. So now that I have a nice long tail pulled out in front of me, I'm going to choose to create my slip knot right here. And what I'm going to do is wrap the yarn around my finger. So I'm going to wrap it once and twice. And now that I have 2 loops across my finger, I'm going to take this back loop right here and bring it up and over that first loop. And now that we have a back loop again, I'm going to take this back loop, bring it over the front loop and off of my finger. So that is a little slip knot. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you one more time. I'm going to take the yarn and wrap it twice around my finger, taking the back loop, bringing it over the front, and one more time, take the back loop and bring it over the front loop and off of your finger. And that is how I choose to work my slip knots every single time. At this point, I can take my knitting needle and insert it into my slip knot, and I can pull tight just to secure it and have it resting nice and loose on my knitting needle. So now that our slip knot is onto our knitting needle, it's time to work a longtail cast on. Now for the longtail cast on method, you should have 2 tails or 2 strands of yarn coming off of your slip knot. As you can see here, I have my little pile of yarn over here, and then the other edge of the yarn is connected to our skein. So I'm going to use my 2 fingers right here, and what I'm going to do is grip underneath both of them, and then grab the rest of the yarn with my 3 remaining fingers. So overall, we're kind of producing 2 loops. There's 1 loop here on my thumb and another loop here wrapped around my pointer. So I'm gonna show you guys that again. Here's my 2 strands of yarn. I'm gonna use my 2 most forward fingers. I'm gonna go underneath, grab both of the tails, and wrap them around my finger. So it's a really smooth movement. I'm just coming underneath and then twisting my hand. So once I have my fingers facing me like this, again, we have 1 loop here and another loop wrapped around the pointer. What I'm gonna do is take my needle and go up and through my thumb loop. And then we're gonna come around and grab the pointer finger loop. And then we're gonna come back through and drop down underneath the thumb. So now we have just casted on another stitch. Keeping with that same formation as before, I'm gonna take the needle, go under and up through the thumb, swing around, we're gonna come top to bottom through the pointer finger loop. And at this point, I'm gonna head straight down through my thumb loop. I can kind of drop it off and tighten up my stitch just a little bit so we still have some movement. Again, picking up that little technique formation, under and up and under, straight through the thumb. I'll try to change up my little angle here. So I've got my 2 loops, under and up and under, and now we're gonna drop down through the thumb loop, just straight through. You can let the loop off of your thumb. So let's work a few more long tails because these do look a little bit interesting. So again, I have my 2 loops wrapped around my fingers, under and up and under, down through the thumb loop. And once you start picking up a little bit more pace and you've kind of mastered the cast on, you can get a little bit more of a rhythm. So again, here's my formation, under and up and under, and through the thumb. Once again, under and up and under, through the thumb loop. So that is the Longtail cast on. I'm gonna throw on a few more stitches so that I have a nice little base to work with. As you can see here, you can kind of pick up a little bit of a finesse as you're casting on your stitches. So the very first stitch that I'm going to teach you guys how to create is the knit stitch. As you can see, I've worked up a few rows using some knit stitches so that I can clearly show you guys how to work this stitch. And before I even begin to show you guys how to enter into that stitch, I want to take a moment to talk about needle placement. Now, as we're working knit stitches or purl stitches, you will notice that one of the needles will either rest on top of the other to create an X, or that needle will go behind and create an X. And for a knit stitch, we always want our right needle to be resting underneath the left. So we're always going to be creating a little bit of an X shape there, but your right needle will always go behind the left one. So let's go ahead and talk about how to work that knit stitch. If we look nice and close here, you can see my next stitch is right here and I'm waiting to get going. What I'm going to do for the knit stitch is enter from the front of the stitch through the back, and I want my needle to pop out and make an X. So what I'm gonna do is take my right needle, insert it through the front of the stitch, and then poke it out the back. So let's go ahead and show you guys that one more time, nice and up close. This is my next stitch right here. I'm gonna take my right needle, insert it through the front of the stitch, and push out the back. And you guys can see that little bit of an X formation. At this point, I'm gonna take my working yarn, wrap it around that right needle counterclockwise. So all I'm gonna do is take the working yarn, wrap it around the right needle, and from here, I'm gonna slide that right needle underneath and back through the front. And then I can cast off or move that stitch to the right. So that is the knit stitch. I'm going to take my right needle, insert it through the front of the stitch, going to the back. And now I have my X formation. My right needle is behind the left. I can take my working yarn, wrap it around the needle, slide that right needle through and back through the front. And then I can kind of just shimmy my work up and slide that stitch off onto the right needle. So again, for that knit stitch, we're going to come in through the front, poke out the back, wrap our yarn, push the right needle through, and back up through the front of our work. So again, front to back, wrap, push, and pull that loop through. Try to bring you guys in nice and close again for the knit stitch. Here's our next stitch. Insert front to back, wrap the yarn, push that needle through and up and off. All right, now that we've covered how to work the knit stitch, next I'm going to cover how to purl. Now, purling to me is kind of like the exact opposite of knitting. We're going to be working the same stitch but backwards. So there's a few things that we do need to note. As mentioned earlier with the knit stitch, we always wanted our right needle to rest underneath the left, like so, to create that X. Now for the purl stitches, we always want our right needle to be worked in the front. So as we enter the stitch, I always want this right needle to be resting on top of the left. And of course, we're just going to be creating that X again. The next thing to note is that with the knit stitches, previously the yarn was always started in the back of the work, and then you work the knit stitches. For the purl, we always want to make sure that our working yarn is resting in the front of our project. So we want this yarn to be facing us, not behind our work. Now with knitting, again, we were entering from front to back and creating our X. And for the purl stitches, we want to do the opposite. So what I'm going to do is take my right needle and insert from the back of the stitch through the front, just like that. And that is going to be how we work the purl. So again, I'm going to take my right needle, I'm going to start from the back of the stitch and poke up and through, just like so. So here is the back side of the work. And now here is the front side. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys that one more time. Take your right needle and insert from back to front on your stitch. And now, as you guys can see, my right needle is resting on top of the left for the purl. So at this point, I can take my working yarn, wrap it around the needle, and then opposite to knitting, I'm going to push it back underneath, like so. And then I can slide off that stitch. And there is the stitch that we just worked. So again, to work that purl, take your right needle, insert from back to front, take our working yarn, wrap it around the needle, and then I'm going to push this tip under, through the back side, and then push it off. And this is what the purl stitches look like. So again, back to front, wrap our yarn, push that needle underneath and through and off of the left needle. Again, take our right needle, insert from back to front to purl, wrap our yarn. Now we're going to push that needle through and under the back side and then push off that stitch. So these are all the stitches that we just worked. I thought it'd also be really fun to show you guys how to work ribbing. Now, ribbing can be worked in a multitude of different ways. You have your standard 1x1 rib stitch, or people can also choose to work a 2x2. So for that just means you're gonna work 2 knit stitches and then 2 purl stitches. Likewise, with a 1x1 rib knit, you're gonna work 1 knit and then 1 purl. 1 knit and then 1 purl. So that's what I'm gonna go over really briefly right here. At the very start of my row, I'm gonna start off with a knit stitch. So again, working with knit stitches, I want my working yarn or my working tail here in the back of my work facing away from me. I'm going to work this very first stitch as a knit. So insert from front to back, wrap my yarn, and pull through that first stitch. And now to create that ribbing, I'm going to switch to a purl stitch. So for purls, you always want to bring that working yarn to the very front of your work, have this working tail facing you. And from here, I'm going to insert my needle from back to front. I almost said hook. So a purl stitch again is back to front, wrap my yarn, push through, and slide off. Now we're gonna go alternate back to a knit stitch. So I'm gonna move my working tail to the back of my work. And yes, this does have to be worked like this on every single stitch. I'm going to knit the next stitch. Slide this off onto the right hand needle. And now we're gonna alternate back to the purl. So bring that working tail to the front and work a purl stitch. Again, moving back to the knit stitch, move that working yarn to the back, insert from front to back, and knit, and back to a purl, move that tail to the front, insert from back to front, and purl. So I'm just going to repeat this for the entire row. And I'm actually going to add on a few more rows so that you guys can see what that rib stitch looks like when you have a little bit more work added on. All right, so I've just added on a few more rows of this 1x1 ribbing, and this is what it results in. If you look nice and close, you can see a straight vertical row of knit stitches, and then directly next to it, you'll see a row of purl stitches, and that is just from alternating the knit and the purl, knit and purl back and forth. Now, in case you guys ever put your work down and then come back to it and you can't remember what stitch you're supposed to work next, there's a very easy way to tell what stitch you have in front of you. So if you look really closely here at the very last row of stitches worked up against the needle, you'll see a very clear definition between a knit stitch and a purl stitch. Now with knit stitches like this one here, you can kind of just look below your row to see what stitches you have worked. And this is that little bit of a braided technique, which means this is going to be a knit stitch. Looking at the stitch next to it, you'll notice a little tiny bump sitting here at the very base of the needle. Now, purl stitches are noted by these little garter stitch bumps that you see right here, and right here. So purl stitches will always have this little bump running horizontally directly underneath the needle, whereas with the knit stitches, like right here, the yarn just kind of comes straight through and there is no loop resting on that next stitch. So that is how I know that this is going to be a knit stitch. And then looking at the next stitch, again, we have that little purl bump running across, which means that I need to work a purl stitch on top of the purl. Here at the very next stitch, again, we just see this straight vertical bar coming directly into our work. So that is a knit stitch. And then right here for the next stitch, you have that little bump running across your work horizontally. So that denotes a purl stitch. For this next segment, I'm going to show you guys how to work increases. Now, of course, depending on whatever pattern that you're using, increases are really important to help shape whatever garment you're trying to make. Now, there's two different kinds of increases that I like to work with. There is a make one right and a make one left. Now, the difference between make one right and make one left is the direction or the slant that your increases are going to take. First off, we're going to go ahead and start with a make one right. Now, with make one right, you're your work is always going to be increasing to the right, hence the name Make One Right. So I'm going to go ahead and start here at the very beginning of the row, and I'm just going to knit the first few stitches to get these out of the way. So there's one knit, and now here is the second knit stitch. Now after I work my knit stitches and I spread my work apart, you're gonna notice this little horizontal bar that runs between the two stitches. So if I bring you guys in really close, here is this horizontal bar between the two stitches. So it's gonna get a little bit tricky here. My work is gonna get bunched up, but I'm gonna take this left needle and pick up that horizontal bar from the back of the work to my front. And now you'll see that stitch resting across my left needle. Now that I have that bar picked up onto my left needle, what I'm gonna do is take my right needle and knit this stitch. So I'm gonna insert from the very front of the work. I'm gonna cross over through the back. And now I'm going to knit this like normal. So there is one Make One Right. I'm gonna go ahead and knit one stitch in between so we have a little bit of wiggle room, and I'll make one right again. So if I bring you guys in nice and close, you can see that horizontal bar right there. And I'm going to pick up this bar with my left needle from back to front. So I've picked up that bar and now it's resting on my left needle. And once again, I'm going to use my right needle to insert from front to back, insert through that stitch, and knit this. And that is another Make One Right. Now let's go ahead and move on to a Make One Left. So I'm just going to work a few of these stitches like normal to have a little bit of space from the Make One Rights. Let's go ahead and make one left. Again, I'm spreading my work apart so that you can see, but we're just going to be looking for that horizontal bar resting between the two stitches. So that bar is right here. And to make one left, we're going to be inserting our needle from the front to the back of that horizontal bar. So I'm going to take my left needle and insert it into that horizontal bar from the front to the back of my work. So that is what it should look like. Again, here's that horizontal bar. We're going to take that left needle, insert it through the front to the back. So now we have that extra stitch casted on right there. And now we're going to knit this, but instead of coming through the front side over here on the left, what I'm going to do is take my right needle and bring it through the back side of that loop. So I'm just going to wiggle in like so. Here's what the back side is looking like. And I'll go ahead and show you guys that one more time. So I have that extra stitch or that horizontal bar casted on. I'm going to take my right needle and insert it from the back side of the work. Another way to look at this is underneath that work. So there is a Make One Left. Now I can yarn over and knit that stitch. So that is a Make One Left. I'll show you guys a few more times. I'm just going to knit this next stitch out of the way. And now again, if I spread my work a little bit, you can see that horizontal bar right here. We're going to insert our needle from front to back and pick up that extra stitch. And now at this point, I'm just going to pull on my work a little bit so you can see the space. I'm going to take my right needle and go underneath and knit through the back. So I'm just going to be knitting through the back side. Again, we're not going to be working this way as we did with the Make One Right. We're going to take that right needle and insert it underneath through the back, just like that. So that is what your needles should look like when they're crossed over. And now we can go ahead and finish knitting this stitch. And there is another Make One Left. It's time to show you guys how to decrease. Now, when it comes to decreases, there are two different styles. There is the slip, slip, knit decrease, And then there's also a knit two together. And very similarly to the make one right and make one left, depending how you decrease is going to shape your work. Now in order to work a slip slip knit, what I'm going to do is slip the next 2 stitches off of my left needle and onto my right. And now I'm going to take my right needle and insert it into the stitch as if I'm knitting it. I'm going to come as if I'm knitting it and just take it right off of that left needle. Again, we have to do it one more time. Looking at this next stitch, I'm going to insert as if I'm knitting it and slip it off of the left needle. So now we have 2 more stitches here on the right, and at this point we're going to knit these 2 together. So in order to finish out this slip slip knit, I'm going to take my left needle and insert it through both of those 2 stitches as if I'm knitting it. So you'll notice that the left needle is placed on top of the right needle, and from here I can yarn over and finish out that stitch. So we've just combined 2 stitches into 1. And with a slip slip knit, our work is going to be leaning to the left. So notice how I'm working that slip slip knit here on the very edge of my right-handed panel. Over time, we're going to have a slant that works inward. Again, let's work that slip slip knit. So I'm going to look here at these next 2 stitches. I'm going to slip these onto my right needle as if I'm knitting it. So slip, slip, and now we're going to knit these 2 together. So I'm going to insert my left-handed needle through both of those 2 stitches, and I want that left needle resting on top of the right, and finish out that stitch. You can pull both of those loops directly off of the needle. So there is another decrease. Let's go ahead and show you guys that one more time. I'm just going to knit a few more stitches out of the way. And once more, we're going to slip, slip, knit. So I'm going to slip it off knitwise. That's 1, and that's 2. And now I can go ahead and knit these 2 together. So I'm going to use my left needle to pick up both of those stitches, insert, and finish out that stitch. So that is a slip slip knit. Now on the other hand, there is a knit 2 together. So now I'm just going to look here at these next 2 stitches, and for a knit 2 together, I'm just going to insert my right needle knitwise through both of those stitches from front to back, just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys that again. We're looking here at these next 2 stitches. I'm going to use my right needle and insert from front to back through both of those stitches. And at this point, yarn over and knit those 2 together. And with knit 2 together, you're going to get a decrease to the right. So it's going to be right slanting on the left hand side of your work. So let's knit 2 stitches out of the way. And now let's go ahead and work another knit 2 together. So I'm going to look at these next 2 loops, these next 2 stitches, take my right needle and insert it knitwise through both of these 2 stitches. So again, I want my right needle resting underneath the left, and then I can knit those 2 together. I'll knit 1 more out of the way, and let's show the knit 2 together one more time. So looking here at these next 2 loops, I'm going to insert my right needle knitwise through both of those stitches, or both of those loops, excuse me. Yarn over and knit 2 together, and I can slide both of those loops off of my needle. So now we've just decreased again. I'm just going to go ahead and finish out this row with knits, and I'll be back to show you guys how to cast off. All right, for this very last segment, I'm going to show you guys how to cast your work off of your needles. Now, unlike crochet, you can't just pull out your needle and call it quits. You really have to be meticulous on how you're finishing off your row. So let's go ahead and work a very basic cast off. Starting at the very beginning of our row, we have to knit the first 2 stitches. So we need to get 2 stitches onto the right needle. So I'm just going to work those first 2 knit stitches. And now that we have 2 stitches or 2 loops on our right needle, I'm going to insert my left needle through the first stitch and bring it up and over the second stitch. So what I'm going to do is tug on my work a little bit, insert it through that very first stitch over here, and now I can kind of pull on my working tail and slide that first stitch up and over the needle. So you still have 1 loop or 1 stitch on your right hand needle. So let's go ahead and cast off another stitch. Because I only have 1 stitch on the right needle, I need to knit 1 more. And now that I have 2 on the right needle, I'm going to tug on my work just a little bit, insert my left needle through the first stitch and bring it up and over and off the needle. So you'll always have 1 stitch remaining on the right hand side. Let's go ahead and knit 1 more. And now with 2, insert into that very first stitch and then pull this up and over and off the right needle. Again, let's knit 1 more. And with 2 loops on the right needle, I'm going to take my left hand needle, insert it through that first stitch, and then slide it up and over and off. Knit the next stitch, and let's cast this one off. So picking up that first stitch, sliding it over the second and off the needle. So this is how you work a very basic cast off. And as you continue to cast off your stitches, you'll notice that the rest of your work is now just kind of free floating, and we have this final edge right here. So now this is all ready to go. I just need to finish up the rest of this row. Now here at the very end of my row, I only have 1 stitch remaining on my left needle. So I'm going to cast that off onto the right hand needle and finish out the very last stitch. And now when you get to this point where you only have literally 1 loop remaining on your work, what I like to do is just kind of pull up on this tail right here to make a super long loop. And then from there you can just cut your yarn, reach through and tie off a knot. But again, I'm just gonna pull out a nice long tail, cut my yarn, and then use my 2 fingers to reach through, grab that tail, and then finish out and tie off that knot. So that is a very basic cast off. As you can see, I kind of messed up right here, so we're just going to ignore that. But for the most part, this is what your work is going to look like when you cast off your work. So that is the full run through of the knitting basics. So that's pretty much going to wrap up today's video on the introduction to knitting and everything knitting basics. Hope that you guys really enjoyed this video, and if you guys have other suggestions of other types of videos that you guys would like to see from me, please feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Suki's getting a little bit rambunctious here, so I'm gonna get going, but I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Stay safe, I love you, happy knitting. I hope that you guys' first projects go great. Feel free to join the Discord as well. I have the link for the Discord down below in the description. I would love it if you guys could join and show off your projects, your whips, your FOs, anything that you guys want to share with the community. We'd love to have you guys over there, so we're gonna go ahead and sign out here. Bye!